fire some rapid fire questions to you, if that's all right, just to warm you up and get our audience ready to know John Nicolades from Bridge Housing. How's that sound?
Beautiful.
Okay, you haven't heard the questions yet, so don't go too early. Okay, John. Now, two people you'd invite to dinner, living or past. Who would they be?
Karl Marx.
Right. Yep.
Okay, and Obama.
Obama. Okay, lovely. John. Now, this is not to have people guessing your age, but the first concert you attended. Who was it and why?
Okay, it was Daddy Cool.
Okay.
1970 at the ANU Refectory.
In Canberra. Wow, fantastic. Hidden talent that nobody knows about John Nicolades.
I love cooking.
Love cooking. Excellent. And if you could spend the day in someone else's shoes, who would that be? I dare say it wouldn't be Dan Andrews or Gladys Berejiklian at the moment.
That's a really interesting. Actually, I would be one of probably the early suffragettes. Maybe, is it Amelia Pankhurst?
Right, yeah. Yeah, and why, John?
Because I think there was something interesting about the struggle for women's rights that is just interesting, and where you have to do, tough things in order to get reform, and to do it back then in an era where, let's say, women didn't have the vote, regarded as equal to men. Constituted quite differently as a different sort of species, but to have the guts to be able to go out there and stand up and to push against convention, and to have a sense of agency, I find that inspirational.
Yeah, very powerful, isn't it? Absolutely. Now, John, the last question of my rapid fire for you is, if you could go back in time, so time travel's a thing. It mightn't be too far away, actually, time travel, the way technology is evolving. So if you could go back to the 20-something John Nicolades, sit beside him and give him some advice, what would that advice be?
That advice would be, don't underestimate what you're able to do, and don't talk yourself down. Yeah, brilliant. So have confidence in yourself. It's a big thing, absolutely a big thing. All right, John. Look, let's cast back to your days growing up in Gippsland. You and your broader family. Is there something that sticks with you in your growing up that still sits with you today? Whether it's you as a leader, as a CEO of Bridge Housing, or your role as a father or a community member, is there something that you can recall back in your growing up that you go, you know what, that was powerful and it meant something then and it still means something today? Probably the most powerful thing that I experienced was actually seeing my father, who ran sort of cafes in country towns, and the way he would treat people who didn't have enough money either to pay for to pay for a meal, or to or even back then, dealing with Indigenous sort of people. And my father was, my father came from probably a left-wing background, and while he was a small business person, was also very respectful of people and understood that sometimes people couldn't pay for things, and he would then provide them with a free meal and so forth. Now, probably small things in the broad scheme of things, but it shows something about his own sort of politics and the way that he would treat people with respect. And he probably didn't really differentiate between whether it was somebody who was important or somebody minor. Okay, so those lessons or that sort of philosophy has stayed with me, and it probably formed the core of my sort of beliefs
Yeah.
in sort of, let's say, fairness, respect, um, and trying to understand people. That was the other thing. He was always very fascinated by people's stories, and
Mm-hmm.
so am I.
Right.
And that has flowed. That has probably flowed into some of my characteristics of my leadership style as well,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
we'll talk about a bit
Yeah.
later.
So would you say your dad was a compassionate, sounds like it, a very compassionate human being?
Well, he was a very compassionate human being. You know, like
Yeah.
most dads, he had his strengths and limitations, but
Yeah.
what he had was compassion. I mean, in part because of what he experienced. I mean, he was a refugee from the Second World War, and
Yeah.
also he had to flee Greece before the Germans or Italians came, and
Yeah.
he spent about 6 months in a internment camp in Turkey. I mean, he came from an island called Samos, which is right near the Turkish sort of coast. So
Right.
at that time, he would have been probably 17 or 18,
Yeah.
leaving his home, because if he had stayed there, he probably would have been in prison because he'd been engaged in left-wing activities on the sort of island. But look, that's
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
a story. But
Yeah.
so I think those experiences clearly formed, his world view as a young man, and then I think that and carried that through as he, came to Australia and built his, businesses and worked in his cafes, and the way
Yeah.
he was with people.
Right. And John, that kind of leads me to your kind of early days, and you mentioned before, prior to the interview starting, your time in Canberra and you're studying up there, etc. If you could think back then, what was your ambition from a career perspective?
Look, the move. So we moved from, let's say, country Victoria or regional Victoria to Canberra. And I think the most formative thing was that I went from probably a reasonably good high school education to suddenly being plopped into a school, Tilapia Park, which
Oh, yeah.
middle class area, and that was a total transformation for me.
Yeah.
And I suppose to this day, it just my belief in good public, good public education, because that was transformational for me, and it changed, and it changed me. So by the time I went to university, I was interested in, what was I doing? Anthropology, sociology, and then I was thinking, well, what can I do with this practically? So I decided that, look, I wanted to become involved in some form of change, and social work seemed to be the best option for me. And from there, I moved to Monash University and did a postgraduate degree in social work.
Yeah.
So I've come to, let's say, community housing really through working in community services and so forth, rather than perhaps other paths, which may be development and so forth. So part of it has always been, I've always looked for jobs where you're going to be able to be in a position to try and influence public policy, and trying to get change. And probably pretty early on, housing had become, if there's one constant in my career, it's been involved in housing.
Yeah, yeah. And John, tell me about change. So you've had, and we're going to talk a bit more in detail, a very long career in the sector, in the housing sector. As a change maker back then, Tilapia Park, ANU. I used to actually live in that area, Tilapia Park. It is a great school. I used to live right around the corner from Tilapia Park. Great school, good part of the world. But as a change maker, someone passionate about change and having an impact, I think what I'm hearing is on people who are probably the most vulnerable in our community. Has your spark for change changed during that time? Do you still wake up and go, I can actually make a difference in people's lives? Probably back when you were youthful as such?
Look, the passion hasn't changed. I suppose the method has changed because during that period I became involved in sort of left-wing sort of politics and so forth. And so the essence about, trying to develop a fairer, and more just society, having a belief now in social justice is still there. Probably the method has, has changed, and that's why I think community housing organisations are really fascinating organisations, because it's just the potential and the scope of what you're able to do. So what does that mean? So in one part, it's just the range of things you become involved in, and your fellows, you could be talking to financiers in the morning, a potential development partner in the afternoon, and then you're going to you're going to speak to a group of tenants. Okay, very different, very different people. So that's the range of activities that you do. But it's also the public policy potential of community housing organisations, because housing is so central to equity issues. And I won't do a song and dance about this, but if you've got secure housing and so forth, that provides you potential to do sort of other things. And we count the number of studies and so forth. I don't think we need to prove that. But housing also requires governments to make hard decisions about how they're going to, spend their tax dollars and so forth, and that then brings in the public policy sort of aspect of housing, and the community housing providers then have really got a public policy role, which they are exercising through their industry groups, and but also have got a potential political role because they're based in the community. They can also do a lot of advocacy work with their local members, federal and state, and even local government, in a way that, let's say, a state housing authority would never be able to do. And that also probably reflects a bit of change that I had. I was a policy officer at Shelton, New South Wales. I would have been a big advocate for, public housing. I now think that, in fact, the only way you're going to save, social housing and build more affordable housing is actually through community housing providers, because we've seen what happens to housing departments within the state governments.
Yeah. And John, is it hard to navigate that consumer need, community need, with the demands of, say, a financier who's expecting a rate of return on their investment? Do you find that challenging?
Yes. So, look, part of it is that I think providers need to be very careful about what they are. At the end of the day, community housing providers are there to provide, services to our residents and also people who require housing. And so what they need to do is really balance the needs of the service delivery, the community development work, the community engagement work that they do, against how they finance that. And so I think finance is a tool. It's not the master of what providers should be. Now, I'm not saying juggling that is not sort of easy, and particularly where the Australian community housing sector is in its stage of sort of development, that to a large extent we will have to advocate much more strongly to both our state and federal governments about trying to get a subsidy in order to be able to equalise that equation, because for however much financial engineering you're able to do in the current situation, it's still not going to meet the sort of growing need for housing. And also we need to be very careful as providers that we don't spend too much time about doing financial engineering and not really focus on what the business should be delivering, which is good quality service delivery to our to our tenants.
Yeah. Now, John, I'm going to be unfair on you, and I want you to cast your mind back to your time at the Canterbury Area Community Housing Scheme, which is now Evolve Housing. If I could ask you this question without notice, the three things about the sector that has stayed the same, and maybe the three things that you can recall that have transformed significantly in your that's 20 plus years ago. What comes to mind? The three things that have changed and the three things that have stayed as a constant.
Right. The things that I hope will remain as a constant is the community base of community housing providers. Okay, that they should be anchored within their community. And clearly that was easier way back in the early 80s when we first started. I was one of probably 30 small schemes that operate in New South Wales, and we were given a task to go out and find 35 leasehold properties. Okay, so that was really the genesis of the sector in New South Wales and probably across Australia. So very small organisations. But I think that's probably the one constant. I can't think of two other constants, because the sector has so utterly transformed. I mean, if you had asked me in 1983 that the sector would look what it is, the sector would be what it is today, I would have been sort of flabbergasted. Okay. And that's been what the extraordinary change. I mean, the change in the size of the sector, the capability and the capacity. I think that's one significant change. The other change is, I suppose, the resilience of the sector, because clearly in each state, state governments have had different views of the sector, and policies have ebbed and flowed. Either they've been supportive, or they've been neutral, or they've been sort of antagonistic. And I think New South Wales has gone through all of those periods. So the other thing would be the resilience, and the sector is not going to go away. Probably the third major change is again, it goes back to that capacity, the capacity question. I think Australia has probably got, compared to both the UK and let's say the US and even Canada, I would say probably the most sophisticated and capable sort of sector of all. I mean, given our size, I think we punch above our weight in terms of policy and understanding the policy settings and trying to influence that. We clearly, I think we're much more sophisticated when it comes to issues around, financing, so forth. Given the current size of the sector, we're able, I think, to do much more effective deals with large-scale developers. So again, another sign of our ability to punch above our weight. And I also think we've just got a much broader view of what community housing providers are able to do and be really critical community anchors. Not only through provision of housing, but we're unique as not-for-profits because we're not subject to philanthropic funding and so forth. We've got nice, secure cash flows. And I think with that, and this probably with that, we've also got probably a responsibility of the role, the significant role that we play within our communities because of the security of our funding streams. So look, that's probably a mishmash. That's probably more than three.
No, that's good.
You know, three things. But look, the sector is utterly transformed, and I think people need to. Probably one thing the sector doesn't appreciate enough is its own history.
Okay.
And where it's come from. And I think it's really important that people do understand that history. Now, I'm lucky I've lived it.
Yeah.
Right? I was there at the start. I went away, and I came back, and I've spent my last probably 15 years of my sort of career again seeing the sector transform even in the period when I returned in 2006 to 2021.
Yeah. John,
they should be doing a good start doing a history of the.
I'm just thinking that. So let's take you back to 2006. So you've been 15 years with Bridge, and you've utterly transformed the organisation as well, and made a huge impact on the sector, not just in New South Wales but more broadly, John. And I think you know that to be true. I want to just delve into your psyche as a leader. So again, I'm asking you to test your memory. John Nicolades, the CEO in 2006, to John Nicolades, the CEO on the 23rd of August 2021. John, what's changed in the way that you lead people? Actually, hold that thought. What's changed in the way that you lead yourself first?
Right. Okay, look, here's a bit of sort of history, because I think it's probably important, and this goes to this issue of having confidence in yourself.
Yeah.
And I think it's just important for people who do want to become leaders, and also who may feel that they are in a bit of a rut, or they may be in a situation where they're doubting their ability and capacity.
Yeah.
Now, I came to the job purely by accident. I'd been working in the New South Wales Public Service for 5 years, in the early 2000s, doing affordable housing. Now, if you think it's difficult now, it was like, it was, to use a Greek term, it was like the task of Sisyphus, which is, that's the image about the bloke rolling a big boulder up a hill, and then it keeps rolling back.
Right.
So I came out of that experience feeling pretty sort of gutted. Probably didn't help that I had a few sociopaths as bosses and so and so I get this gig through a friend of mine. I was doing a bit of consulting. A colleague of mine who was sitting then on the Swish board, which was Bridge Housing predecessor, said, "Look, would you mind coming in with babysitting while we look for a back then an executive officer?" And then Swish, or the Southwest Inner City Housing Cooperative, a bit of a mouthful, had around 650 properties, and was not in great shape. Anyway, while I was there, I hadn't any particular plans to apply for the job, but then I thought, well, this looks a bit interesting. And it took me back to my old community worker sort of roots. So I said to myself, look, I'll give this a go, and I'll see what I can do in 3 years, and see whether I can transform the organisation, or at least bring it back to some place of equilibrium. So I applied for the job, I got it, and anyway, in one sense, the rest is sort of history, although that's simply to flatten the task. So I went into it with a bit of a headset, because while I have this thing about maybe confidence and underestimating my abilities, I know some people might find that very funny to hear it from me, but let me tell you, like everybody else, we have those little voices in our heads. You can't do this, you're useless. How dare you think
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you're the imposter?
The imposter syndrome, yeah.
I suppose the other thing I have is I've got perseverance, and I'll give something a go, and I would place perseverance and commitment way above brilliance. I think brilliance tends to create other character traits.
Yeah.
So, look, I'm dogged, okay, and I'm probably smart enough to know, by that stage in my career, because I was basically a white guy in my, let's say, I'm going to name the age. I was in my mid-40s.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of those critical junctures, I got the job, and look, I think I just persevered. I don't know whether I hadn't really read a lot of leadership texts and so forth. I had a small team of people. Look, at the end of the day, my leadership philosophy is pretty simple.
Yeah.
Having a clarity of vision, okay, having a plan about how you may implement sort of that vision, making sure you got let's say, the resources, or at particular bits of time, how you may get those sort of resources in play. And it was quite difficult back in 2000, and that first 3-year period from about 2006 2009. But look, the other thing I've got is that I like people.
Yeah.
I spend, in terms of my style, I'm a very people-led leadership style. Okay, I'm not charismatic. I don't. Well, I suppose I can be at times, but I'm not. Wouldn't define my leadership style as a charismatic sort of leader.
Yeah.
I try and engage with people and bring them along. I try and involve them in the process of change.
Yeah.
I relate to individuals, so look, one of my things that I've always done is that as new people come into the organisation, I will always go and greet them.
Yeah.
My own right, get so at least they get to see who the CEO is, and the CEO is a remote figure, and that's been pretty constant. Now, look, that's easy to do in an organisation of 40, 50, 60, even now 90 people.
Yeah.
But I still think it's pretty. It's very important.
Yeah.
That you're able to do that. If you can't do it, to actually bring people, together, either to have lunches or so forth. So you get to know them. Okay? So they feel that they are, and you are telling a story that we're in this together. That everybody contributes to the success of the of the organisation, and everybody has an equally important role to play, whether it's people at the reception, whether it's the finance people, whether it's my housing manager, whether it's people doing allocations and so forth. Team that builds organisations.
Yeah.
CEOs have got critical roles to play within that, but a CEO can only be effective as a team is.
Yeah.
And as long as people are willing to, commit themselves to what the organisation is doing. So the philosophy is to maybe have a clear vision, have a plan about where you want to go, and that plan captures people's sort of imaginations. That you've got the right, let's say, resources. And when I say resources, I mean but both people, but business systems and so forth.
Yeah.
You've got to make sure that you're constantly focusing on that.
Yeah.
I think it's little things that really get under people. So if you start the technology isn't, if your technology working, if you don't have good, I think really good HR processes in place.
Yeah.
That I mean, like good people and sorry, HR is a dreadful term. I mean,
people and culture. Yeah.
Doing the learning and development and so forth, and that's been the great, because we got the capacity to be able, the community housing providers have got the capacity to be able to do that, I think, in a much greater extent than any other not-for-profit organisation, because again, because of the cash flows and so forth.
So that, John, that sparks another question, but I think you've just defined it about what makes a good culture. You basically, let me see if I can replay this back to you. You've said that it doesn't matter your role or your place on the corporate hierarchy, for whatever better term. Everyone's got a role to play, and it's the sum of those parts that really lead an organisation to be successful from a cultural perspective, but even a business perspective. Would that be an easy way to sum that?
Yes.
Yeah.
It would be. Look, probably the other thing as well is you've got to make sure that your staff are going to be reasonably well, remunerated, because some of these things can become sort of cliches.
Yeah.
And so you've got to make that sort of real. I mean, people can smell somebody who's inauthentic a mile away.
Yeah.
And so, and again, while authenticity is a cliche, I mean, people have to see that you are basically, again, walking the talk.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also with that also then provides that degree of resilience, because everything, you can't do everything. Sometimes you fail, and sometimes you stuff up.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm certainly not saying Bridge Housing is, no organisation is perfect, and we've had our stuff ups as I've made probably wrong decisions. I haven't been decisive enough at particular points I haven't been decisive enough. But at the end of the day, I think, I believe that, if your staff think that you are an authentic leader and you are doing the best for the organisation and for them, then you're going to get a good organisation. Okay? You're going to get positive outcomes, because I think people will be able to sort of commit maybe a bit more of themselves to to delivering on the vision or the mission of the organisation. Look, and I suppose to some extent, people just want to go and have a look at our staff engagement sort of results, which we publish in our annual report. We're quite transparent as an organisation. That at least is sort of one measure of the stickiness of our staff and people who come to work for Bridge Housing, and how they feel about the organisation.
Yeah, no, brilliant. I was going to ask you a follow-up question there, but I think you've already answered that too, John. Is that advice to the emerging leader, the person who feels they want to take the next step in their maybe career and lead people? You pretty strongly said there the authentic leader is the way to go.
Yeah. Look, I think that's one element. Authenticity, but I think there are other attributes you need to have as a leader. And particularly within this space, I think you need to be curious. Okay, don't take things at face value.
Yeah.
I also think you need to have a good understanding of, or build an understanding of both public policy and the political environment in which we operate in, because they dictate really what the shape and nature of the community housing sector is going to be. So you've got to understand that operating context. Look, I came from a non-financial background as a social worker. So the other bit is you do need to get on top of financing. Now, you don't have to be the CFO of the organisation, but you understand you need to understand the finances of the organisation, particularly because you need to ask your CFO, questions.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Even though David Miller, my GM Finance and Corporate Services, is fantastic.
Yeah.
But you as a CEO have to also be skeptical, need to ask the right questions around finances.
Yeah. It's important.
The other factor which I've talked about now a lot is really understanding your people and people and culture piece in your organisation. So I think if you have those elements, and probably the other thing is really being respectful of people and treating everybody the same, in the same way. And that could go to just simple things like, acknowledging people, saying good morning, thanking people.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the most incredible things is that I think people really don't understand the value, the power of simply saying to somebody else, look, thank you, or acknowledging work that's been, well done. Okay. I mean, that can have a much more powerful impact than, let's say, I'm not saying that salary increases aren't important. They are important, but people want to be valued. I think people have got this innate desire to be acknowledged, okay, and be acknowledged for the work that they do in an organisation.
Yeah, no, absolutely important. Hey, John, 15 years with Bridge Housing as CEO, as you mentioned earlier, since 2006. Is there one moment along that journey that you could say is your proudest moment as the leader of Bridge?
My proudest moment is, well, there are a number of proud moments. Probably in 2009, I mentioned earlier that I said I would give myself 3 years to see whether we could stabilise and rebuild the organisation. Yeah. So in 2009, we went through our first amalgamation or merger, and we got back then under the regulatory regime, straight A's, okay, as part of the rebuild. And then we moved from 650 properties to what was 1,100 properties, and also changing the corporate structure of the organisation. So that's probably the first proudest milestone, because we were now being able to operate on an equal playing field with some of the other larger providers. The second proudest moment is that when I would say corporatised Bridge Housing, I brought in we moved from what I call a startup culture, where I was the executive officer and jack of all trades, but probably master of none, so to speak. Okay. And then putting in our first round of our senior sort of executive around about 2011, which then provided that platform for Bridge Housing, for further growth. And then the third proudest moment is when we secured one of the social housing management transfers of 1,200 properties. So Bridge Housing went from around about 2,300 properties to, 3,500. Wow. So each of those points were significant organisational, growth, growth points, okay, where the organisation had to, transform itself. So I suppose, to be a bit. So I suppose what that also said to me was my capability of changing my leadership style, because the leadership required back in 2006 and the amount of work was very different from what was required, in 2017, and also probably the other thing I didn't talk about is how you have to stop micromanaging.
Yeah.
Let people, manage and let that go. So, so I suppose the other thing about my own journey is my ability to transform myself through that 15 years.
Yeah. And probably good advice, John, to any emerging leader as well. Don't think the next 3 years are going to be the same for the next 20.
Yeah. Look, you don't want to be lying in bed at night, 5 years into your CEO role, sort of thinking about a minor IT sort of issue. Whereas I probably had more sleepless nights back earlier in the stage, earlier because you had to be on top of everything in order to understand what was happening. Who's the potential of the people? I mean, if you're appointed people because you think they're going to be better than you, that's the other thing. Probably appoint people who. Well, you need to appoint people who have got more knowledge, probably more experience than you have in the particular areas. And I've got a very good and stable executive team with Rebecca, David, and Christopher Dibb, and and I'm really excited that Rebecca was appointed now as CEO of Brick Housing. So that's the other thing about the people and culture part about developing the next generation of leaders in your organisation. They don't have to stay in the organisation. No. But I do think you do have a responsibility you've got an absolute responsibility to build the capacity of your people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're excited for Rebecca. She's a great supporter of the AHI, and we look forward to supporting her in any way we can going forward. But John, now 15 years is... I don't normally swear on these interviews, but that's a bloody long time in anyone's language. So 15 years.
Yes,
now,
let me tell you.
Yeah, you go.
Story. Look, I didn't actually sort of realise it was 15 years because it was flying past. But probably about 2 years ago, I said to myself, I've been here 13 years, and I went back and I looked, and I said, God, that's long.
Yeah.
And yes, you're right. I mean, 15 years is a long time. Although I must say, probably Ken Marchingo at Haven Cove probably being one of the longest CEOs. Look, I tend to think that, look, my view is that probably 15 years may be too long. However, in my defence, because I've been able to change over that time, and I suppose the driver has been, that curiosity thing.
Yeah.
Sort of understanding enough about the need to change as a leader, and certainly there was no pressure from my board. I didn't get the tap on the shoulder. It was, I decided to, is enough. In most cases, if people get 5 years as CEO these days, that's a good inning. So I expect that you're not going to see these long-term CEOs in the sector anymore, because I think the sector is changing, and I'm probably a product of that first generation of CHP sort of leaders.
Yeah, but as you've described, John, there's been incredible transformation, not just within Bridge, but the sector itself. So I think it's very different. A leader that sits in the same organisation, which moderately changes over the 5 years, very different to someone who's spent a long time, maybe transforming it 3 or 4 times during your journey. But John, what's next for you? The day that you walk out of Bridge, hopefully you're walking out of the office without COVID restrictions, and you're leaving to a standing ovation, no doubt. But what's the next day and the future hold for you, mate?
So I had hoped to time my departure so I would leave in spring. I also like gardening as well. Okay? I would have hoped, thank God, the worst of COVID was going
Yeah.
and that I would be able to travel. Look, I've got two grandkids.
Yeah.
Who I really enjoy spending sort of time with.
Yeah.
It's actually nice to be. It's actually good to play with a 4-year-old that really takes you away from being the pressures of a CEO. Or play with a toddler who's sort of smashing or as you're doing the building blocks.
Yeah.
I wanted a break. I'd hope to be able to travel, spend some time with my, as I said, with my grandchildren, do a bit of gardening, spend some time with my partner. Although I think she'll be rusted onto her job for a while yet. And then I'm not particularly looking for another CEO job. I would probably like to do a mix of maybe some advisory work, go on boards, whether it's paid or unpaid, I don't really sort of care, and perhaps do some mentoring. So I'll be back to the sector. I've built a lot of experience. I really enjoyed the opportunity to be a mentor through the AHI's sort of program. And I think the new program looks really exciting and a nice as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
So they're really my vague ideas. I don't have another job sort of lined up. I just hope my super is going to remain look in good shape. But look, I'm pretty privileged. I've had a great career. I've had a fantastic time at Bridge Housing. I'm pretty comfortable, and so I've got, let's say, I've got a security, bit of a security blanket, rather a safety net, and I'd just like to see what more I can probably do in a part-time role rather than looking at full-time work after I had a break.
Yeah, a bit of a break. John, it's certainly a privilege for us to be able to talk to you today and hear some of your experience, and thank you for sharing that. We were going to talk a little bit about the learnings from COVID, because there has been some substantial learnings from COVID. There's probably been not just the dark times of COVID, but there's certainly been some great learnings and silver linings maybe about social housing and the need for housing coming out of the fact that this pandemic's occurred. But we are running out of time. We might have to do a part 2, I think, of this, where we maybe drill into that a little bit. But can I just say thank you on behalf of everyone at the AHI and all our members for your efforts in the sector today. It sounds like it's not going to end. You're going to still have some time, part-time maybe, role in the sector doing some meaningful work or more meaningful work. But I just want to thank you for the time you've given us today to talk through your experience and your career, which has been grand.
Mark, look, and thank you for the opportunity, and I hope an hour of me will be riveting enough for the sort of sector. I've got to say, look, thanks everybody, and I really have appreciated both the support of my staff, my board, and terrific to work with other colleagues in the sector, naturally, or through our industry groups. And I hope everybody stays safe, and I do hope the government does take this opportunity to see maybe we'll have another bite of the housing investment cherry or apple as part of some economic rebuilding through I think what has probably been a much more difficult sort of what I would call COVID. And I just want everybody to stay safe, look after themselves, their families, and their loved ones, and of course the community. And I do think the sector does fantastic work. And it'd be great to see the community sector even grow larger and stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, John Nicolades, thank you so much.
Thanks, Mark.